Welcome everyone to this workshop style meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council. We are meeting tonight in the first of a potential series of meetings to work out the priorities and work planning for our 5-year plan for Project Lunenburg. And so tonight we're going to get a presentation or a series of presentations from staff on work that's been done to date in terms of project planning and prioritization. So I will turn it over to staff to present the work they've been diligently working on since our last meeting on this topic, December 17th. And I should note that you may have noticed the absence of our CAOB Renton. She is dealing with a family commitment this evening and therefore is unable to be with us in person. I'm not sure if she's in on, she has logged in, but so the staff will dutifully deputize in order to provide the presentation to us.
Good evening, everyone. So as you can see from our agenda, the first thing we were going to talk to is, we'll wind up having a fuller discussion a little bit later, but this implementation summary of the 35 priorities is one of the elements that we presented at our first workshop on December 17th. So this chart has all of the 35 in the order in which staff ranked them. So whether or not this ranking is exactly as you'd like to see it is one of the questions we'll be dealing with this evening. So just to give you a bit of a top line on this. So what we've been doing is working on individual critical paths for the different action items. We focused primarily on the first 7, as those will be the ones we'll most likely be acting on in the next fiscal year, although there are a couple that are already in progress that just happen to already be part of our work plan. So this is just an overview one. I just had to show you the kind of width of it, but I'll try and make it a little bit bigger. So you have all of these in your package. They are a little difficult to see. So what we've done here is just, we've got 1 to 35. So this is just a summary document that just shows for the ones that have been completed where kind of what the timing is of those items. So as I say, we focused on the first 7 plus whatever other ones staff had time to accomplish. And I just wanted to show you, so we have these, let me just open up one just to give you an idea. So this, so these individual charts are basically the critical path for each item. So a lot of this information came out of the CCP. So obviously the action number comes from where the way staff weighted it. We're showing what section it appears under in the critical path itself. We have a span because staff took some time as we were doing the ranking. We also were estimating the time frame that each item would take. Now, where it stops or starts can be variable because some of the items are interconnected. And then we have sections here, phases 1, 2, 3, so on. Those are the steps to implementation that are also in the CCP. So what we've done is just kind of break those out into, to achieve this step to implementation, what do we have to do? So this is what staff have been working on. So one of the things we can offer, I'm going to hand it over to Dennis, who's going to just explain a little bit about how these materials came together as well.
Thanks, Heather.
He set up the template for us.
I think Councillor Sanford has a question as well.
I know you're really familiar, you're moving back and forth through the documents really easily, but I'm in that package trying to figure out what is
Oh,
what.
I'm sorry. Let me just show you.
It's okay, and I'm not there.
So on the SharePoint in the folder.
Yep.
So item number 1 is just our agenda. Item number 2 is this implementation chart that shows the ranking.
Mhm.
What we've also added into this chart, so it has what it is, what the weighted score was, its rank, the estimated cost, the estimated project length once approved, which is something management came up with as we were ranking all these items, and then who the responsible departments are, and then just more recently we added a lead for each item to at least do the critical path.
It's more the Gantt chart.
Mhm.
Heather, I get lost at it.
And this,
Sorry, Heather, I'm just, when counselors are speaking into the mic, if you can, because this is being publicly broadcast, so
Oh,
if you can take your masks off.
and then this chart we also saw back in December. So this was the summary. This has it by section of the CCP, so we can see how these things kind of interconnect. And then this document, I have, this has got multiple charts in it. So the first one is the high level 1 to 35. And then after that, I have the full critical path Gantt chart for the first 7 items. So if you want to take a closer look at all of those ones, we are prepared, the staff who prepared these first 7, we are prepared to give you a bit of kind of overview of each one without going too much into details. So you have an idea of how this is accomplished.
So when I look at what is on the screen there, it is different from what, as I've followed you through these documents, to what I'm looking at in the package.
This is the exact same package. So if you're in item 4, so item 4, the first page is the high level 35 actions. And then the next pages of this,
Gotcha.
got it? Okay, great. Sorry for the confusion.
No, it didn't go far enough down the page. Thank you.
The color coding here is really just for legibility on this. So I just alternated blue and gray so that we could see each line, because it does get, the graphic of the chart does get a little. So there's really 2 halves to this. The text under activity is the critical path, the items we have to do. And then the charts on the right go from 2021 all the way over to 2025 for the first 5 years. And that's really just a visual aid, so you can see kind of where things come into effect. So for the items that we don't have the start and stop date, we do still have the span of time written in this part of the chart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the important takeaway here is that staff are working very diligently to do the 5-year work plan so that that can be approved by council, and then we're off to the races, as it were.
So I've handed over to Dennis if you want to give a little top line of the first 2, or were both yours. I do. Hang on a second.
So with the management team, it became evident that we were going to need a tool to help us develop plans in order to implement the various parts of this and the CCP as a whole. So on the management team, that there was a variety of knowledge about what Gantt charts are, from 0 to a little bit better than 0. And I was just wondering about the mayor and councillors and how much background with Gantt charts that you might have had. Okay, great. Okay, so
Yeah.
but basically, in a nutshell, the Gantt chart is an XY graph with activities on the y-axis and to time on the X. So it's a tool for us to understand and to plan out schedule. Gantt charts, plans, schedules are terminologies that are often used interchangeably. So out of the top 7 items that we have in the CCP, 3 of them, fortunate for us, are within public works. And I developed number 1 and number 2, and Paul developed number 6, which are all within the care and custody of public works. So I don't know how much the detail that you're going to want to know for me to go into with the individual plans. So I'm just going to give a fair amount of detail and background, but stop me if it's too much. So Heather, I'd like to start with number 2, if I could. Number 1 and number 2 are both having to do with the wastewater treatment facilities within the town. Oh, great. Yeah. So this Gantt chart I put together now. Now it's a draft. It's a first pass. And I took the liberty of a few assumptions that we're all going to have to do with any of these Gantt charts that are going to be developed in these early stages. So putting this guy together, one of the major assumptions that I made is that I built it as if we were going to build a brand new wastewater treatment facility. Now that's the worst case scenario, and it has the highest level of costs and details and all that stuff. But I thought I'd start with that just to give an overview of what a major project would look like. So if you've got a major project that requires detailed engineering in order to design and build it, it would typically look like this. And I'm going to use Peter's here. Okay. So I've broken this down into several phases, and I'll go. This one will be in a bit more detail, and the other one not so much. But if we look at the phases that I've identified, these phases are what a typical major project would look like. I've identified phase 1 as a project setup and initiation, and I've put in a potentially typical time period that would take place in over to 2-month period of time. It would go from where we are today to a review and acceptance of our projects set up and approval by the council and all that stuff to move forward into the next phase. Phase 2 is what I've identified as FEED, and FEED stands for front-end engineering and design. And feed, to me, I've worked in heavy industry for 30 years, and feed is the most important part of the whole project. And what you're trying to do in feed is to get a full understanding of what the problem and what the issues are, and and be able to develop a number of options that are going to satisfy that criteria, so solve the problem that you're trying to accomplish. And within this array of options, at the end of feed, you're going to select a option that's going to be the best one. And it's the best one as far as solving the problems. It's going to be the best one as far as cost, schedule, quality. It's the one that's going to best satisfy. Now, just to give you a background, if you don't do feed properly, you can run into multitudes of problems down the road. Because as you get more and more detail into engineering, questions come up and problems could come up that you have to address, and quite often it leads you to, well, we should have did this back in feed, that this was something that should have been established back then. And it leads to delays in your schedule, it leads to extra cost, it leads to rework in the engineering and the project management stage. So to me, phase 2 in any kind of engineering project is key. If you do that correctly, the other stuff that comes afterwards is actually easy. Because now in phase 3, you do detailed engineering. You take that chosen option and you put together the details as to how we're going to design this plant, and put together the documentation that you need in order to build it. So if you've got the option selected and the background and all that stuff done well, that this can be a relatively easy thing, because you don't run into problems with having to go back and answer key questions. So that's for phase 3. For phase 4 is a procurement stage. During engineering, you identify the various types of materials, piping, structural steel, electrical cables. All this stuff gets identified in your engineering packages, and they get sent to procurement people, and they purchase stuff, and they get it sent to your work site. Phase 5 is a construction phase, and that's where you start the building. And I've assumed here with this project that it's a greenfield site, that we're going to be starting someplace fresh, and that this construction can happen independently on its own, et cetera, et cetera. After you get it constructed, you would move on to phase 6, which is a commissioning and startup of the plant. And then once that's done, you can hand it over to your operations people to have it working. If we do decide that with the wastewater treatment plant that we're going to keep what we have kind of thing, and change or redesign certain aspects of it, it'll follow the same kind of program as well, but the timings might be differently. In my experiences, shoehorning new equipment in existing plants can save you money and effort and all that stuff, but sometimes it creates problems, because now you've got to get this equipment to work with that equipment, and it could cause you issues. So there's a balancing act there.
Councillor Duggan?
The cost estimate that's associated with this, so there's a 10 to 15 million at the top, that price range, that's for potentially doing a full rebuild. That's not a cost estimate based on
That there's no
retrofitting the current building in any way.
No, I think that was a number that the team had come up with, and it's really a WAG, which is a wild ass guess. For now. So we put out an RFP to companies that this week in order to do our feed engineering, if you will. So we will have proper estimates when that engineering's activities are complete.
Yeah, and the RFP that just went out then, was that for a full new build?
We don't know yet. The RFP, the engineering that we're doing is the feed part. So that they're going to look at various options, and options are a full new plant, retrofitting, replacing equipment that we have, and then hopefully at the end of that, we will come to a conclusion as to that this is the way that we go forward.
So they'll provide a number of different options, each of them?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, and just to clarify, the numbers that you see up at the top, that was just a very broad pricing range that was in the CCP document itself. So it was pulled out of there.
Yeah. That number, I'm not going to say anything because it can vary depending on all kinds of factors.
Deputy Mayor?
WAGs are totally acceptable right now.
WAGs are
Totally acceptable, yes.
Yeah, good, because we probably are going to have lots of WAGs in the next 5 years. It's at least something. It's what WAGs are starting points, right? But right, you have to start somewhere until you, based on the information that you know at the time now, and then we'll get better as time and knowledge marches on. So.
I think WAGs are going to quickly enter the council vernacular. I can see that happening. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. Where in this beautiful chart is the outfall pipe work?
It's all part of the whole scope.
Okay.
It isn't pulled out distinctly yet, but it can. As far as the feed goes, that we've identified the RFP, that's one of the scope items that's identified. Now, I think as we get more and more information and stuff of that outlet pipe is going to end up being an independent project, because I don't think it depends. It's mutually exclusive to the treatment plant itself. And we can pull that out, and we can develop plans and the detailed Gantt charts and put planning on that little part of it, so that can be done as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
That just raises a follow-up for me, Dennis. How, and this is unrelated to the project management work, so I don't want to be too much of an aside, but how could it be separate when the quality of the plant affects the quality of the effluent?
Yeah. That they can be aspects of it that will be considered for sure with that. Now we'll have to see how the engineering comes out, especially in the front end.
Okay.
But,
Councillor Halverson.
But you know that the effluent is what it is, and we have to make an assumption that the plant is going to treat it properly, and it's going to be acceptable to be able to be discharged into the harbor. And the other part that the discharge is just figuring out exactly the point for it to be exiting. So it can be mutually exclusive.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair enough explanation.
Yeah.
Councillor Halverson.
Yeah, no, if my memory serves, there were, 3 different options presented, and I believe one of them, it almost seemed to mitigate the pipe itself. So it would depend on the actual, whatever system we decide to go on as far as the engineering, whether that would determine if, when, how that pipe will be designed, if at all, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would, yeah. Yes, it sounds like a appropriate thing for sure. So I don't think I want to go through any of the individual line items underneath each phase. But you can see yourself about the start and finish dates that I've made some assumptions and some wags as to what they are, and the time frame is built on the towards the right. As far as months for the execution of the various things. So as I say, it's a draft for now, for us to be able to visualize and to get an understanding of the activities that are necessary in order for us to go from today to let's say a brand new wastewater facility at X number of years and months in the future. So
Councillor
an
Halverson.
idea what that is.
Oh, sorry, Dennis. Councillor Halverson.
Dennis, just curious, obviously designing and getting this new plant up and running it's going to be all consuming. Will this be my question really is, will you have time with the amount of effort that's going to have to go into this project to deal with other parts of your job around here? I'm more concerned about your quality of life and for 4 or 5 years over the course of this project.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that question. So it'll be up to me to manage that. I would imagine. I think I'll be leaning a lot on the consultants and being able to take an overview and a directionary kind of role. My background isn't designing nuts and bolts of wastewater treatment plants, so I'm going to keep it that way. I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds, but again, it'll be my responsibility to make sure that everything is designed properly, the way that I envision engineering to unfold, and to make sure that the needs of the town are met to the best of my ability. And if I have to get additional help, I will figure out how to manage that as the time goes on. Yeah.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. Don't mean to be like a dog with a bone, but I'm confused, I think, a little bit. So I'm looking for clarification, maybe from several folks, Dennis, not just you, but I was thinking back when we had the discussion about the outfall pipe. It was regardless of what the quality of what was coming out of the pipe, that the pipe was in and of itself to be relocated, or the sludge that came out of it or whatever was to be moved further out into the harbor.
To extend, yeah.
Right. So to an extent, so what I thought I heard Dennis say was it was going to be dependent on the quality of what was coming out of the revisions within the wastewater treatment plant. So that's one thing, and that's different from what I understood, that the outfall pipe in and of itself was an issue that was going to be dealt with. So help me to understand,
Yeah,
please.
so under the last council,
Mhm.
we commissioned a report by CBCL
Yes.
that gave us a number of options on our wastewater treatment plant that we're still working through now. One of which was an MBR process, which is the one everybody keeps talking about when they talk about the Cadillac.
Mhm.
And one of the things in that report that noted was that the quality of effluent is so high with an MBR that the engineers said it might potentially obviate the need to extend the outfall. That direction. And then we had a peer review report from Dillon Consultants that talked about the outfall extension. And now we're into essentially another phase, which is getting actual sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, because technical lingo sometimes escapes me, but pre-design work.
Yeah.
So we're taking it, so basically we commissioned a consulting report to tell us which direction to go, and now we're getting into the nitty gritty of the specifics. And you'll recall the RFP that we have issued now, have we?
Yes.
Yes. Includes looking at the outfall and what a solution would be to deal with the outfall situation.
Right.
And Dennis, feel free to correct me.
Yeah, no, that's true for sure, yeah.
Okay.
My understanding was in the Dillon report, it was recommended regardless of what happened with the wastewater treatment plant, that the outfall be addressed.
Yeah.
And that's why it was included in the current RFP that's out, right? And
Yeah.
I'm just not seeing it reflected in here. And then as I was listening to the presentation, I almost feel like it's missing. So
Yeah,
just-
I think it's within, I think what you can say, Susan,
It's
is
embedded,
it's
actually.
embedded. It's within the scope of
Yeah.
work.
okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an aspect of the overall issue and design. So,
Any further questions? So those were great questions on the, Dennis, are you done?
yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I assume that we're not going to go into any more deep depth.
No, council, I think this is great to show council what staff have been working on and how we're working through these issues, and these lead to good discussions too for council to understand what all of these directions entail and how we can feed them in. Are there any questions from council at this stage? I'm thinking specifically questions about how we're going through the work planning process, or direction you might want to give, or to staff that we can give collectively about how we proceed with this process. Or any questions of staff about how it's all working? Anybody? Okay, seeing none. I have one, and I don't know in the absence of B. Oh, sorry, Councillor Halverson.
Well, I think this is a question I would ask of B, and I'm going to guess it's going to be a similar question to you. It might be about, and maybe I've missed this, but how these were weighted. I know the staff went through and evaluated. I'd like to know what the criteria was on, I mean, obviously the wastewater treatment plant is going to be a priority here in the town. We've identified that.
Yeah.
I have no problem with being near number one, but I do see some with, I mean, there's some near the bottom that I feel like should be right at the top. So I'm just curious how that weighting system worked.
Yeah, so at the back of the CCP, there were criteria, 5-year part. So I should back that up. The steering team, while we were going through the CCP, had a fulsome discussion at their meetings in conjunction with the consultants, was Councillor Sanford Brokaw and Councillor Mosier, because they were on the committee, about criteria for prioritizing action items. And that led to appendices being at the back of the report. One, the sort of 5-year criteria, which is how Upland, when they remitted the CCP to us, pulled these 35 items out of the broader set of items, suite of items that were in the full report. And then an annual prioritization framework that ran through like what is going to happen year 1, year 2, year 3, whatever, or what the priority action items were for the 35 that were the 5-year action items. Those were scored by staff, principally by senior management, I think, and I'd look to senior managers to correct me.
No, that is correct. A smaller group of the senior managers
Yeah.
weighted those as a collective group.
Weighted those as a collective group and came up with the listing collectively. And I presume through averaging or discussion.
So there's, yeah, so, there may be some discussion and that we would settle on, oh, I think it should be this, and, so those sort of things. But each section has weights assigned to it through consultation with Upland and those sort of things. So there's fuller spreadsheets that we can certainly share with council if they want to, but that's how those rankings developed. They factor in things like, do we know where the funding sources are going to be, and what will be the impact on perhaps like an underserved population and those sort of things. And so they all have a certain weight to the overall rankings.
Yeah, I can't speak for other members who are on the steering team, but I thought they were very broadly thoughtful criteria. But having said that, to your point, Councillor Halverson, I think staff would agree, in having gone through them, that this is an art, not a science, right? Some of them are very technical in nature, and the financial impacts are pretty objective, but maybe you can speak to, because this generated, I think, a lot of good discussion about these. So maybe, Ms. Dagley, you can speak to.
I will try. I mean, Heather has brought up an example of one. I don't know which one this is because I can't see from that far away, even if I had all my glasses on. But yes, and I'm sorry, I don't have like the fuller detail one with me. I might be able to pull it up too. But yes, there are, various things that we could weight one way or the other. And so it's really for us, it was a discussion of all the senior managers, just, you know, what we thought was the best fit. But it is like the mayor has mentioned, it is an art, not an exact science. Like if it costs this, it's going to be in that group. It's not necessarily the case. So,
Yeah.
But it over half of the senior managers participated in the weightings.
And the documents for these we went through in December, and those are on SharePoint if you want to have a look at the different charts, because the weightings were prescribed. So it's an attempt at being as subjective as possible.
Councillor Duggan.
I know that we could talk about this stuff forever, but I guess in what Ed's saying, I am just noticing now that housing on this priority list, you know, starts at number 13 and goes even lower than that. And I guess I'm just surprised as well to see that some of this stuff has ranked so low as far as priorities go. So is there, and I don't know if Ed asked this, but is there any room to renegotiate some of the numbers? Like,
So
will we be reviewing that at some point?
Yeah. That's the whole point of these workshop meetings is the idea is that staff have gone through this now and they've scored it and they're bringing proposals to us and doing work planning as a proposal to us. And then we will have a bit of a back and forth where council will give direction on, you know, it's council's pleasure on any of these things. I mean, there are limits in terms of resources and things that if we want to up something, we may not be able to fund something else kind of thing, but because there are just realities that we're dealing with, but council is the final authority on what comes first. But I will say sometimes, Councillor Duggan, and this happened to me too a bit in the exercise, that the weightings can be surprising. Like the sewage treatment plant affects housing because it affects our capacity to service housing. So some of these things that were more foundational were foundational because they affected, you know, a lot of things. I had the deputy mayor next.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think the weighting is it's fair from our, you know, from our being on the committee with Project Lunenburg. But then again, you know, you have to appreciate, you know, staff did this scoring, so they're probably looking at it from a little different lens than what we would. If we would have been involved, it may have skewed it a little bit. I don't know if it would push the ranks up a lot, like this, as you know, as the worship said. He said, like, you know, you'd be surprised how it comes out. So, you know, I think it could be a little bit, you know, maybe we might want to adjust it a little bit. I mean, housing is a great example because it was a great community will for housing is number one, but we may have to do a few other things before we actually get there to make it most efficient. You know.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of housing too is private sector or not-for-profit sector. Like we're in the business of regulating the supply of housing, but we're generally not in the business of providing housing ourselves. So these things where they're specific to the town, right? To, you know, like I think a lot of what we're talking about in terms of making our regulations more permissive and redoing our land use bylaws, that will enable other partners to come in. And if we, like, to take the sewage treatment plant as an example, we fix the plant, they can do the development, right? Any other questions, Councillor Sanford?
Just for clarity, again, it's always a lot of information, you're processing it all the time. So when you're saying that, you know, if we fix the wastewater treatment plant, then we can do development, but because development is a staged process and takes, you know, a length of time, should we not be starting development so that when we finally do get the sewage treatment plant fixed, we're ready to roll with development? Like, I don't understand. So for me, not seeing the development straight up.
And yeah, sorry,
because
and
it's
maybe
fixed housing,
maybe I
right?
misspoke. It's not like an A-B kind of thing. I was just trying to make the point that some of them are interrelated in ways that you wouldn't expect. Right? Councillor, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah,
And if staff want to weigh in at any time, just put your hands up.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that's kind of like the misconception I want to avoid as well. Like nothing is idle until something gets finished. I mean, there's going to be wheels in motion, you know, getting ready so that it's be a nice, easy flow. And you may be 3 steps into the next thing before that's finished, you know, to keep going. I absolutely agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Dennis, did you want to?
Yes, so an exercise that we haven't done yet is to, as you're talking about, to evaluate and understand the interdependencies amongst the projects, right? As of now, we've got a Gantt chart showing all the 35, but as we've depicted them so far, that they're depicted as independent, but they're not, right? We're going to have to go through an exercise where we identify what are the interdependencies and which ones have to occur before other ones can go, and which ones can go in parallel, and at what level of parallelness can occur. So that there's being able to understand the execution of the 35 projects under the same time frame is a very complex undertaking. And as of now, we have to make a bunch of assumptions and guesses, and in order for us to visualize it at this conceptual level, and we're going to have to work towards getting more definition and interdependencies.
Yeah. So the way I look at this is basically an update meeting where staff are sharing what they've been doing for council. For me, the thing that we need at the council level is, you know, Dennis talked about the critical path. Like, we need the critical path for how we get all 35 done in 5 years, right? That's the level of critical path that we need. And of course, there are going to be perils and pitfalls along the way that might cause us over time to adjust those assumptions in our annual planning. But I would envision that unless anybody has a better idea, and I'm perfectly open to it, that what we would need to get from staff next is a sense of what the 5-year work plan is for these 35 action items. And to Dennis's point, or to Mr. McPherson's point, I should probably do that for formal council. What the interdependencies and interrelations would be, so that then council has all the context it needs to begin deliberating where things are going to go in the final analysis before we give blessing to the essentially the 5-year plan for work to proceed. And then that'll influence our annual planning and our budgeting and all that stuff. Councillor Halverson.
Well, this is kind of what I'm worried about is the amount of resources we have here. Obviously, we have a finite amount of staff and resources to make all of this happen. I don't know that anyone on staff can anyone at this point give us an estimate on when this kind of chart you're talking about will be ready. I mean, we're gearing up towards our first budget, and again, we've only got 4 years, and we're talking about a 5-year plan. We've got 4 years to get this off and running, and if we miss a budget year, then it's around 3 years. So I mean, we want to hit the ground running with this. Is this something that realistically we can expect to see in weeks or in months? What do you think?
Well, I guess we will have to manage the expectations in order to meet that, because, as you say, the time frame and the resources that we have. So we're going to have to come to an agreement and understanding as to the level of effort and accuracy at this time, right? That's why I think we have to start with something which we have today, and we have to figure out how to progress it properly. The bottom line is, it's going to be a challenge in order for us to be able to do this planning part in the time frames that we have, so then it comes down to exercises of prioritization and assumptions and all that sort of stuff that we're going to have to engage in order to be successful. And to talk about prioritization is that I would rather pick out 7 or 10 projects and do them reasonably well than to take the 35 and fail at the 35, if you know what I mean, right? So yeah, I don't have a specific answer for you, but we're going to have to consider the tools and an analysis for us to get there.
And again, I don't think we're not trying to bite off the whole thing here in the first year and
Exactly.
lay out but I think what we do need is, okay, here are, like what we're seeing here, which is great, is we're starting to see, this has this time frame, it's a high priority, so it's a first year priority that's going to take 3 years. Okay, great, I can work with that.
Yeah.
This is a first year priority that's going to take 1 year or 1 year to do, or this is something we can push off for 3 year for the third year, and that's going to be a 2 year priority. But
Yeah.
again, I know even just to get that amount of detail is a great deal of effort on all staff's part. So I guess really what I'm trying to find out is, can we expect that? What can we expect before we start hitting our first budget?
Do you want me to try that? When we went through the list, we did to assign the different departments, and we assigned a lead for each one of these to create the critical path and chart. So while we were prioritizing these first 7, because those are very likely to be something that takes place in the next fiscal year, all the other staff know which ones are theirs, so we are sort of going off and working on those. Like Arthur is way ahead of the curve and has all of his done already. So the rest of us just have to go through and update ours. There's a lot of them that are with Dawn, so she'll probably need some support from others of us to get the ones she's in charge of done. But our intention is that we kind of work through at least get at least a preliminary version in the next number of weeks.
That's pretty much what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, to Dennis's point, I think it's okay to do a little bit of, building the airplane while we're flying. But at the same time, what I don't see personally is, that we have 2 or 3 years to wait to start planning. Like these are all multi-year priorities. And so if we're saying we're only planning 10 for this year, we're only planning how we're like, even at a rough level, like we can't wait for 2 years to do the planning on these things, because then the 10 we pick now are the only 10 we're getting done. And, we approved 35, and I think they're ambitious, they're challenging, but, and I'm sure there are going to be ones that we exceed expectations, one that we're not progressing on as fast as we'd like, but those are the 35, unless council wants to revise its direction that we've approved. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to staff? Like it's not as if, it's not as if we're knocking off 7 of these a year in 1 year, right? These are going to be loaded across years to the point. So we have to know that for budgeting purpose, as shot in the dark as some of these assumptions are. Every assumptions at some level are shot in the dark.
Yeah.
Your worship, I think staff would.
Was generalities, right? For typical project portfolios, and we're going to have to find out the details, particular for our projects for sure.
And that's also a good accountability check for us organizationally to know, we expect to have this done by this date. If we don't, maybe there's a good reason, but if we don't put the date on it, you'd be amazed how in government things grow and expand.
Not amazed at all. That's actually when I mentioned about the item at the very bottom of the list, I think it should be at the top. It's exactly that we should have a metric where we're measuring, once we set these priorities, we should be measuring ourselves, council and staff and committees all the way through to make sure that we are keeping ourselves on track.
Yeah. Well, and there's the work planning measurement, and then there's also the results-based measurement that was the evaluation metrics in the implementation chapter of the plan, which also have to be monitored in one of the, so that we know if any of these, I mean, it's great to measure the work plan, but you also need to know is it having an impact in the community? And you need data for that. So there's a there's a fine balance I think we're going to have to strike on this between figuring out what we can do organizationally and what's a reasonable ask of staff in the long run. Councillor Sanford.
So just to add to the conversation, I'm thinking about, are there opportunities for support for staff as they're working through these planning pieces to look at how we increase capacity, look at the same things differently? Because we can't keep looking at different things the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't keep telling ourselves, we can't do this because of that, or we can't do that because of this, right? We need to be looking at things and saying, and Peter, you were raising this the other night, we need to be saying to ourselves, okay, we're going to do this, and what does it take to do this? How are we going to do this? What are the supports that we need to be able to do this? So I'm wondering about the opportunities for that type of support and thinking in discussions with staff as they're trying to work in the planning pieces. How can we support staff in that way? I don't know.
And some of that, I mean, staff are preparing budget sheets with a lot of that stuff in terms of what they need and how they can improve and that kind of thing. So and this is all sort of the first time we've done these kinds of things at this level organizationally. So it is all being kind of iterative and, learning as we go. And I think it's been very valuable that way. I think for me, what I need as a counselor is just a better sense of what the 5-year sort of overall 35 direction Gantt chart is, and how that all interrelates, so that then we can decide, if we approve it as presented or we want to adjust it. And as staff go through and have the conversations, about the interrelations and all of those things, and they can also say to us if we want to move something. Well, it's butterfly effect when you're talking about this kind of stuff. Like if you move that, you might affect this or that or the other thing. But I think it's taking a little time to develop this. And so I don't think we're really in a position to sign off on anything in my mind tonight, because it's not the full 5-year, understanding of things. And but I think once we get there, and I mean, staff have been working very diligently on all of this. We just came out of the holidays, like we're only 3 weeks into January, but this will affect our budget. So my hope is that we're doing this conversation, and then this dictates the budget, not just for this year, but then potentially it will guide for all 5 years. And hopefully if we get some of the directions right, then we'll also, to your point, Susan, build capacity as we go, right? That's the hope anyway. Does that make sense to everybody? So then I think, are there any further questions or discussion or points that anybody wants to raise? Councillor Sanford?
Just at the beginning, you had asked if we had any questions for staff. I'm just curious, as I look at this and we think about the workload for staff, I'd be curious as to how staff are feeling about turning the ship. Like, how is that, when you look at it, are you thinking, oh gosh, we really can't, I'm overwhelmed, I can't see us doing this? Or are you thinking, well, there's really something here, and if we have the right supports in place, this is really great, we can do this. Like, I'm just curious as to, I know if I try and put myself in the shoes of if I were in a position where I was looking at change isn't always easy. So I want to be respectful of staff, but I also want to be able to support staff in the ways that they need to be supported.
I think I can speak for all of us to say it's the latter. I think we're all very committed to making the CCP work and getting these things to happen. It's just a bit of a juggling act with our regular duties to manage to get these charts done. But we all recognize the importance of it, and I think we're all very committed to seeing this through. But yes, we do appreciate the comment about support. Thank you.
Well, and I think it goes without saying that Councillor Sanford speaks for all of council, unless anybody has a different view, that we want to set staff up to succeed in implementing this direction. So that's going to be a conversation and a negotiation, back and forth to figure out what supports are needed and how we can help provide them in a way that's reasonable in the burden it puts on the community. And I think it is a little short-term pain because we're all drinking through the fire hose right now on some of this stuff. But to Dennis's point, I actually thought that what Dennis talked about in terms of feed, in terms of his projects, I thought was very analogous to what we're doing here, right? Which is if you put the work in on the front end, it pays dividends on the back end. And I think for us, organizationally, putting this work in on the front end for council's plan, which is really the community's plan, because we endorse what the community provided. This was done by 400 people, guided by consultants who helped facilitate the process. So this was not an internal decision. But I think it's to Dennis's point, like we're front end now, and that should hopefully pay dividends on the back end.
Yeah, and I think that one of the concepts that I'm trying to push with the management team, to your quick question is early on identifying a leader for each one of these, and that the importance of having that up front, and this leader becomes a champion, and it becomes the project manager, and it's that person's responsibility to envision and to be able to plan it out from now to the end. And part of being a project manager is managing your funding, your staff, and your resources, and your issues that come up. And that those are going to be key people for us in the execution of this. So, but those are the people that we have to support and listen to, and give them the tools and the support in order for them to be successful, as you say.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford, for that. Anything further from council? So if I can sum up then, I guess for February 2nd, and I mean, this date may have to be tentative, but I'm thinking what I'm hearing from council is that what's needed is for us to begin deliberation on this, is to have the sort of 5-year work plan worked out at a high level. I mean, we don't need to see the individual charts, Dennis, were great as an example, and thank you for that. But I think we need to see the overall high level 35 chart. Just we can meet again, we can reconvene when it's filled in, basically. And we're content to keep the February date. I'll say to keep the February 2nd date tentative, because that might have to move back in terms of staff's ability to get this done. But at the same time, I think I'm mindful of looking at Ms. Dagley, that like every time this gets pushed back, the budget gets pushed back, right? Presuming that council is in agreement that this has to be done before we can get into that conversation. So I think to Dennis's point, we'd sooner have a rough measure of something important than worry about a precise measure of something that maybe is not so important. So yeah, a rough measure of the whole picture is I think preferable for us.
Well, to that end, if we want to put together a summary of the 35, we're going to have a Gantt chart draft of each one in order to put into this summary. So
that's fair enough. Yeah.
It's the chicken or egg kind of thing. We have to do these individual projects so that we can summarize them.
Yeah.
So
and I'm just saying when it comes
to do.
No, and I perfectly appreciate that, and you're right. I'm just saying when it comes back to council, like we just, what I'm getting, the vibe I'm getting is we just need to see what happens what year. Yeah. and how at the end of the 5 years, I mean, we hopefully have these all knocked off.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know both meetings that we've had about the CCP information has come to council very close to the meeting, realizing that February 2nd is two weeks from tomorrow night. And so I guess while it may be doable for staff to do those other items, those other Gantt charts, and get a summary for you, I guess, does council need to have it like like, it seems to be a bit of a challenge that you're receiving it on the day of and to absorb it all. I understand that. It's sometimes weighty and a little daunting at times at our desk. And so I just didn't know if that may mean that we need to look at a different date just so that we have the ability to have some time, to have some thoughtful review. That's,
Yeah, no, I said the date would have to be tentative then. So sorry, Ms. Dagley, sometimes I don't speak in your direction and I think that's not helpful. So what I had said was the February 2nd date might have to be tentative, but I just noted that, you know, to the point that this precedes the budget discussion, that we can move this back, but the more we move this back, we don't want to be in July doing a budget.
no,
I know you don't.
I certainly don't, but we will do what we have to do. But I guess I was just noting that if whatever time we get to, we just may need to make sure we have enough lead time for council to have some review of the documents rather than coming right at the meeting.
And is that preferable to council that, you know, like, what are we thinking? 3-4 days? I mean, this isn't a formal council meeting. I know we have deadlines for formal council, but I'm just thinking.
But it's just, as long as we've got a couple of days.
Couple days?
It's tough. Yeah, I mean, it's
2 to 3? Okay.
Yeah, it's tough.
And they, you know, you guys did a great job bringing us up to speed. I mean, I like to think I'm a quick study, but you really, you know, give us good understanding here quickly tonight.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Right? But it does help when you have a couple days.
Yeah, no, this, so unless anybody has anything further, we'll adjourn. But again, I'd echo the deputy mayor's comments that this, I think, was very helpful for council to see what all needs to be done in order to implement the plan as we've approved it. And we look forward to more when it's ready.
Your worship, just,
Yep.
I know you've got many things at the end, but I guess just to that point about, you know, the waitings and, you know, the information coming at the last minute. And we had our last meeting just, you know, sort of before the Christmas holidays, after your extensive, you know, orientation periods of time, and people may be getting tired and looking forward to the holiday. The waitings are all there on SharePoint in detail for anybody who wanted to look through those if there was a particular item that you were interested in the finer details of how it ended up where it did in the ranking. So I just want to point that out.
Yes, well, for anybody who wants to assess the methodology, we'll stand by it. Thank you for that point, Ms. Dagley. I appreciate the reminder. Dennis?
I just wanted to make us the statement about the Gantt chart that I went through is kind of a speciality because it's heavily engineering kind of thing. Now the other ones aren't necessarily the same kind of ilk. So you know, we've got these 7 examples of available to have a look at, and they're not going to look the same as the one that I talked about. So you know, it depends on the project and the approach of the project manager. So
Okay.
Just to qualify that a bit.
All right, we appreciate that proviso. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Meeting adjourned.